Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 36 of an exciting new series. What if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Bloomerbill on Fanfiction.net. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Masahiro stepped off the train with his tail anxiously swaying behind him. Today there was Pre-Court Gaming Con, and he had really wanted to go to it, but neither of his parents would be able to get the day off work to take him. But he had been saving up his money for the con since well over last year, and had been hoping to go for way longer than that, so Masahiro had done something kind of maybe actually really stupid of him. He'd asked his gaming friends, CC and Green, if they could go with him to the con. Both of them had agreed, and then he'd lied to his parents about going with his friends and their parents to the con. They had believed him because he just didn't lie to them, and now here he was a couple of blocks away from the building that the organizers rented out for the 3-day con, dressed in a costume similar to his game character, so his friends could find him. They'd agreed to meet at the entrance of the Cassandra Cannon. It was out of the way of the con, but easy enough to find, and Green said it would be better to meet up beforehand since finding each other at the con would be near impossible. Masahiro had felt very confident about his plans the night before. They had an agreed-upon place to meet. All sent each other short descriptions of what they'd be wearing so they could know what to look for. And he had known both of them for nearly 2 years now, so what did he have to worry about? Honestly, what he had done hadn't quite hit him until woke up this morning. As nice as his friends were, he'd never met them in person before and completely lied about who he was meeting with. In a whole other prefecture he's never been to before outside of tournaments. There were quite a few ways this could go horribly wrong for him, which he was trying not to focus on to keep his anxiety from rising from any more than it already was. The stares he was getting wasn't helping, but he supposed being dressed in the makeshift monk's gear outside of temple was something that would stick out. Masahiro curled his tail around himself and tried his best to ease his nerves by reminding himself he was here early and that he shouldn't expect either of them to arrive soon, and mentally recalled what the two should look like. Green said he had a strong lizard mutation, pink hair, and would be wearing a panda hoodie, so he'd stand out very clearly on his own. CC had a hand quirk and would be wearing what he called his reference hoodie and shoes, said they'd know him when they saw him, and begrudgingly said he had blue hair when Green pressed. Masahiro had yet to see someone that matched either of those descriptions yet, and Masahiro had to remind himself for a second time that he was early and he wasn't likely to see either of them for another 5 minutes. Masahiro was very tempted to grab for his phone to double-check the time, or even mess around on one of the games just to distract himself, but he didn't want to miss seeing either of his friends when they arrived, and so took to running his hand along his tail instead. Only to not realize how fast time went by from how much overthinking he was doing, and nearly jump when he heard a familiar voice call out Miles. Masahiro whipped his head around and saw a man covered in green scales and had pink hair, the front half in braids like Green. Masahiro replied, surprised by how much he looked like his in-game counterpart. Well, for the most part, the lizard folk were aquatic, and Green clearly wasn't from the lack of fins. Green smiled and settled next to him, though not too closely that Masahiro would feel uncomfortable. Yeah. Your costume looks pretty good. Where'd you get the fur for the collar? Green inquired, pointing a clawed hand to the fluff. Masahiro became a bit flustered and patted the collar. My mom's into making doll customs, and she uses yarn to make fluff, so I thought it would work for my costume too, he explained, and it worked better than he expected, even if he had to make a few layers of it for the right amount of fluff. I'll have to remember that for Halloween. Courier wants to go as a poodle this year, Green commented. The two of them fell into a somewhat awkward silence, with neither of them knowing quite what to say apparently. Masahiro quickly realized it was one thing to talk to someone online and a whole other thing to talk with them in person. When they were playing, they could focus on the game to talk about, and without it there, it was suddenly much harder to think about what to talk about. For F's sake, noobs, I've told you both to boost your perception. If I had my bow, I would have shot you both for being oblivious NCPs already. The raspy jab was ridiculously familiar, and Masahiro couldn't help a grin. Only CC would repeatedly shoot his party members with paralysis arrows for not being more aware of their surroundings. It was how he and Green met CC in the first place, and the pessimistic and somewhat antagonistic Rouge had definitely grown on them to laugh something like that off. Turning to the voice, Mashareo's jaw dropped once he spotted a young man in a white hoodie. Even from far away, he spotted at least 20 characters from various games he's played before and had to resist the urge to run over and see just how many more he could recognize. CC scoffed, cocking his head with a smirk. Told you, kid, you wouldn't be able to keep your eyes off of me. CC boasted, making a show of turning around and revealing even more things he recognized, and frankly, they were all blended together in ways that made so much sense. It that embraided. Where'd you get this? Green standing up and looking at the hoodie up close. CC gave him a SHD eating grin, special loot drop from completing a quest. CC said, preening under Green's inspection, same for my shoes. CC added, bringing Mashareo's eyes down to CC's feet. Oh, he wanted a pair of those shoes. Did they come in different styles? Mashareo would love a pair of those shoes with Lucario on them. Right. Well, we should probably introduce ourselves before we head out to con. I'm Iguchi Shuichi. Green reintroduced himself. I'm Ojiro Mashareo. Mashareo chimed in, getting up to his feet and finally moving to stand. CC pursed his lips, which caused Mashareo to notice the scars on the man's face and its wrinkles of dry skin, something that somewhat concerned Mashareo, since he couldn't imagine what could have caused the scars on his face. CC sighed, just call me Chase. CC grumbled his hand, coming up to scratch at his neck, only to stop near immediately because Mashareo reached over to stop him from doing that. Sorry. Mashareo quickly apologized, putting his hands behind him, jumping a bit when he felt a hand in his hair, and looked back up to see it was CC, Chase's hand in his hair. I got a hand cord kit. Make sure I'm wearing gloves before you try any hero. SHD got it. Don't want our monk to be turned to ashy bloody mush. Chase told him, making Mashareo's stomach flip at the idea forced to his mind. In noted, Mashareo said after swallowing a lump in his throat. Good. Now let's get to that big special event quest you wanted to do, monk. It's your personal quest, so what's our quest goals, kit? Chase asked, wrapping his arm around Mashareo's shoulders. Well, I was hoping to get some posters. I commissioned some Pokemon figures too, and maybe some pins. Mashareo answered, slightly nervous, since he usually was more of a follower than a leader in their adventuring. So, retrieving your scrolls, capture some beasts, find some collectibles. Sounds good. Got any money on you, monk? Or is me and Ranger gonna have to pick some pockets? Chase questioned slightly teasingly. CC, Iguchi admonished, and Chase scoffed. As if you didn't help me loot that village in the Badlands. Chase quipped as he started to walk over towards the convention. Because you decided to make a stupid bet with an NPC known for sending high-level mobs after people who don't pay, and Miles wasn't at a high enough level to survive, even with us covering him. Iguchi scolded as he followed the two of them. The bickering caused most of the tension to fall away from Mashareo as both of his friends fell into their usual banter. I have money, guys. We can get food afterwards too if you want. My treat for coming with me. Mashareo interrupted, and Chase huffed. Bold of you to assume I'd be a cheap sake kid. In case you forgot, I ain't poor, and bought most of your gear, and our rangers too. Chase told him with a grin. And yet you couldn't buy the jewel we needed to get out of debt with Cypher, or Dominic, or Crystal. Iguchi commented, rolling his eyes. If they wanted me to take them seriously, then the programmer should have given them a serious name. Chase said with a scoff, starting up another bickering match between the two. Mashareo could only smile as all of the discomfort just fell away as the three of them continued on to the convention. Hours later, Mashareo could only stare as Chase continued to raise his bidder's paddle, trying to outbid someone for a plushie he mentioned. Iguchi had taken him away from the bidding lot after Chase got up to 50,000 yen, and considering that was enough for his head to spin, Iguchi was probably right to do so. It's been 5 minutes. Is he still bidding? Mashareo said disbelievingly when Iguchi came back with a couple of meat kebabs and some fries. Iguchi released an exasperated sigh, as someone who is more experienced with absurd people doing absurd things because they can just roll with it, Miles. He's trying to be nice. Iguchi told them. Most people don't spend over 50,000 yen to be nice. Mashareo said back. And Iguchi snorted, Chase isn't most people, though I think he's trying to be like his tutor right now, and that tutor tends to be a philanthropist of sorts. Iguchi replied fondly before eating his kebab. And that means spending possibly hundreds of thousands of yen on a sock plushie. Mashareo questioned incredulously. Iguchi gave him a kind, understanding smile and gently patted Mashareo on the shoulder. If it means something to you, then that's all that matters for some people. Iguchi said, trying to assure him. Why does that not make me feel better about this? Mashareo asked before chewing on his kebab. You get used to it. Iguchi told him with a chuff, eventually. Iguchi added after a moment. Before Mashareo could say anything else, though, Chase returned both with the sock plushie and a couple other ones in his arms, including a Feraligatr and Lapra's plush of equal size in his arms. ASHT eating grin predominantly on his face as he returned with his spoils. Another objective completed, along with a few bonus ones. Chase cockily told them as he passed the sock over to him, and the Feraligatr over to Iguchi, Diet Orange, and your sister can call it Nichan, Chase said before settling on a chair and popping a fry in his mouth. Iguchi chuffed again. Thanks, CC. Courier will love it. And put a bow on it too, knowing her. Iguchi said, playing with one of the limbs. Just need to grab a couple more scrolls and a snag, a few more collectibles, and we'll have completed your special event, Quest Monk. Chase commented, rubbing circles on the Lapras' head. Looking at the pile of stuff he had on his checklist of things he wanted to get, Chase was right, and the process was actually really fun, especially since the three of them just kept having fun playing around, and Chase had been key to that. Always having some game quote, or would crack an in joke that he couldn't stop himself from smiling or laughing every single time. And Iguchi was also there with him, discussing pros and cons of some of the merch and geeking out over some of the mods and patches they bought at another booth. On Monk, not going AFK on us IRL, are you? Chase said, waved a gloved hand in his face. No, just thinking, Mashareo told them. On what miles? Iguchi asked, looking curious. New quest goal pop-up, Monk. Chase questioned, leaning forward. I'm just really glad that I asked you guys to come with me. This has been a lot of fun, way more than I thought this would be with you guys here. Mashareo confessed. Chase huffed, as if we'd let our monk handle a mission like this on your own. We are a party after all. Chase responded as if it was an obvious fact. Mashareo grinned back at the two. Yeah, party. Mashareo said, practically beaming. Hey, Jean, who was very much enjoying where he was in his bed, didn't open his eyes and merely pursed his lips and turned himself around and brought his blanket up to cover his body more. Don't ignore me, Jean continued to do just that and buried his face into his pillow. Only for a couple of barks to stir him until something jumped on the bed and began licking his face between happy barking, ripping him out of his dreamless sleep. Groaning, Jean sat up softly, pushing Scamp off of him, and had to keep the pup from giving him any more kisses as his mind began to fully wake up. About time he got up, F-face, Jean flipped off the empty air as he yawned, and then ran a hand through his hair, blearily opening his eyes to take in his apartment. A decent-sized room with small kitchen set up in one corner and a door leading to the bathroom. Not the cleanest place, with the walls all discolored from the pervious tenants' chain smoking. The remains of the same tenants' drunken escapades also changed the color of the carpet in some places, at least, where there still was carpet on the floor. But it was leagues better than his old place. No draft so long as he kept a spare towel stuffed in the window seam. The landlord was a much nicer guy named Quinn that just wanted 1,500 yen each month. No nosy neighbors screaming in the dead of night, and to top it all off, allowed pets, so he and Scamp were both able to stay together. Scamp barked and managed to lick his face again while he wasn't paying attention, and he started laughing. Okay. I'll get up and feed you. Jean promised, slipping on his slippers and walking over to where he kept the dog food bag. F you, starve for all I care, you stupid mutt. The words slipping from his mouth before he could stop them, though it didn't deter Scamp from following after him, tail wagging a mile a minute. He'd been getting better at stopping the other voice of his from taking hold and spouting off its nonsense. Probably because he was in such a better place now in his life that fighting off the worst parts of his mind was much easier to do day to day. Not having to worry about finding a safe place to sleep every night or worry about feeding himself, and more importantly, Scamp every day. After pouring Scamp a bowl of food, Jean left for the bathroom and quickly got ready, thankful for a working shower. Cold or not, it was clean water in a wrecked place like this. And after going without cleaning up for 6 months, showering had never felt so good before. Still drying off, he picked out his clothes for the day and decided on a pair of cargo pants and one of the Hawaiian shirts he bought a while back, weren't that nice, but they were soft and breathable, which was very helpful. During his work, being a courier wasn't as easy as it sounded. Most of it was running things around to people, but when most of that work in the South Side meant he needed to know the local schedules, so he didn't get caught up in anything while taking packages to people. Grabbing his face mask, Gene set up a hand mirror and saw his face for an uncomfortable moment before moving to tie the mask on his face. The smooth gray material feeling great against his skin, and Gene couldn't help tracing it with one of his hands. Shoji Yua had made it for him a couple of days into the job when she noticed how strong it was to see with his baghead mask. He'd been so surprised when she first gave him one, but it had touched him so deeply. Someone had seen how he'd lost his mind without something covering his face, and went out of their way to help him feel more comfortable in his own skin without pressing to know why he didn't. Which he was really glad for, because he had no idea how to explain he couldn't stand his own face, because even a single glance took him back to that night in the warehouse, where he scamps barking and jumping at him, immediately pulled him away from the memories before they could replay, a very good thing for him in the long run, and he took the eager pup up into his arms. "Hey buddy, you ready to get to work then?" Gene asked. "Stupid mutt. Gonna ditch you cause you'd slow me down," getting a happy yip, and the pup licked at his face again, clearly excited by his words. "Alrighty then, let's go get started," Gene said, moving to stand up, and walked over to the window and opening it up so that he could climb down the fire escape. "Screw that. Go back to bed." The stairway inside the building had long since been sealed off when the building was rebuilt a while back. Besides, using the fire escape was way more fun than some dumb, old stairs anyways. Once he was on the ground, Gene let scamp down, and the excited pup charged on ahead, having memorized the way already by this point, and Gene couldn't help helping as he raced to keep up with his little buddy. "Hey, wait for me before you run off like that," Gene called, knowing his words likely wouldn't stop Scamp either way, as the dog kept running off ahead. Stupid mutt. Might as well get lost, not that he was too upset about it. After Scamp's paw had been broken, the poor pup had gotten quite sick and probably wouldn't have made it if he didn't have the people he could fall back on to keep an eye on Scamp throughout the day, or the money to pay for Scamp's medical care. Now the little guy was dashing off like a bullet without even the faintest hint of a limp in the paw he broke, happy as ever to just hang out with him all day. "Oi, looks like Two-Face has found a shirt that ain't that hideous," a voice called, and Gene looked up to see a small group of local gang members. The only other ones who'd be up at this time of day. Or still up, Gene would never know for sure probably. "Morning, guys." Gene cheerfully responded, knowing that they were just messing around with the comment about his shirt, and he gave them a playful mock salute. He saw he got one in return from the Bluenet leading the group before turned back to chasing after Scamp to collect the mail for the day, since most people wouldn't be up yet. Passing a few more friendly faces as he went until he finally got to the edge of the south side and made his way to the P.O. box. One that was always filled up as he got there, mainly by a woman that looked like she wanted to be anywhere else right now. "Twice," she said, looking more tired than normal as Scamp circled her and occasionally tried to climb up her and barking. Gene whistled, and Scamp quickly returned to his side. "Sorry about that." Gene apologized, rubbing the back of his neck. "You didn't well deserve it." The woman took a deep breath and began muttering under her breath, "You're getting paid for this. You're getting paid for this. You're getting paid for this," before she continued to fill the P.O. boxes. Gene couldn't blame for it, though, since the South Side really wasn't the kind of place for most people, and people chose to avoid if they could manage, even if it was his salvation. Giving him a place to stay and a job that paid him enough to get by and save up a little on the side to spoil Scamp with. Speaking of, the woman gave him a set of packages, almost enough to topple over in his arms, but not quite if he bent back to correct his balance. "Thank you, Poppy," Gene called out. "You good-for-nothing beach." He didn't get a reply before he had the truck drive off, and Gene headed off to start his deliveries, handing out the packages if not leaving them inside the places so nobody would take them. Well, he didn't expect anyone to, since Deku-Sensei ran a tight ship and kept people in line for the most part. But there was always that one, but who was one for the sake of it, and there were probably a few of them in the South Side as well. Then once he was done with them, Gene ran back to grab the letters and began to deliver those before picking up the deliveries from the bakery. Could have done without Magna teasing him over how close he and Yua seemed to be if he was being honest, though. Yua could and probably should do better than him. A mentally unstable man wasn't the best of partners, and he wasn't a grade A father figure either. And Mizo-kun, though bigger than him in every way, was such a sweet kid. He always saw Mizo-kun hanging with his friends and even giving the kids piggyback rides. The boy deserved to have someone a bit more responsible and a better role model to look up to than he could ever be. And with how sweet Yua was, Jean had no doubt that she'd find someone like that. Double-checking the last one he saw was a run to Inko-san's friends the Bakugas, and he smiled. He very much enjoyed his visits with Inko-san and was happy to drop in whenever a delivery brought him to her neighborhood, which was fairly often since Inko-san's friend ordered sweets for her husband near daily. "Looks like we're going to see your favorite person today," Jean commented, reaching down to scratch behind his ears, and Scamp barked back, eagerly licking Jin's hand in return. Jean chuckled and moved to start his walk to the station. Scamp, catching on to where they were going, proceeded to lose his little mind and started running around in circles, barking like mad and just unable to be still at all. Hopefully he'll calm down before we get on the train, Jean thought, shaking his head. Doubt that Mutt knows anything about self-restraint, dropping off the sweets when how it always did, because him looking somewhat embarrassed, but happy to have the treats all the same. Though he would apologize for his wife having him go so far and so often. As if it was that much trouble. Done with his delivery for now, Jean made his way over to the now familiar way to Inko-san's apartment. Well, Scamp ran off at the door as soon as Jean let go of his collar and was likely already at her door. Indeed, as he walked up the stairs, he could hear the excited yips and barks from Scamp and the giggling of Inko-san. Seeing the two a minute later with Inko-san holding the pup and trying not to drop him despite Scamp's best attempts to lick her face all over. "Good to see you, Inko-san," Jean called and immediately took Scamp from her arms, ignoring the pup's protests of this matter. "PSS off, you wrinkled beach." Inko-san smiled back up at him. "It's good to see you as well twice. And Scamp, of course," Inko-san told him, petting Scamp's head. "Do you too want to come inside for tea?" Inko-san offered, and Jean nodded. "That would be lovely, Inko-san." Jean replied, "I'd rather dive over the railing, you lonely sea." Jean walked with her in her apartment and got himself settled on the couch before releasing Scamp, who raced off to probably get some more love from Inko-san, which left Jean chuckling as he made sure to wipe his shoes on the floor mat before taking them off. Moving to settle down on Inko-san's couch, Jean couldn't help fondly taking in the now familiar and cozy home of the kind woman, simply basking in the comfortable atmosphere of her home. Though Jean had been weary of her in the beginning, he had to admit that he'd come to be very grateful to have met Inko-san when he had. There wasn't anything wrong with Inko-san, but after being dealt with crappy situation after situation, he couldn't help hesitating in the face of something that seemed to be too good to be true. And Inko-san's help was just that. A nice person that didn't freak out immediately once he blurted out his real name and offering to help him with food or money, which was something he had learned to be suspicious of, because why would anyone be that nice to someone like him without wanting something in return? Inko-san and her son, apparently. As he raised his head to glance at Inko-san in the kitchen, and couldn't help thinking about how silly it was to be suspicious of either of them, even if he was rightly so with the limited information he had at the time. The woman had honestly been one of the few good things to have happened to him, and everything she touched just seemed to magically become better. For everything bad that had happened to him since his parents' accident, Inko-san found some way to make it better. Before, he'd been homeless and didn't have a red cent to his name, while duking it out with the voices in his head nearly every sound of the day, while somehow scrapping by. And now, because of Inko-san, he and Scamp had a nice place to live in, a relatively decent place, a job he loved to do, and let him make a bunch of friends with people who never looked at him twice, even when he flubbed up and one of the voices spoke through him. With said job having him work directly for Inko-san's son, who was just as sweet as she was and was the Deku-Sensei, making him protected because of his affiliation with the kid who, despite what many people told him of the boy, never pried about his quirk. Inko-san even went as far as to welcome him into her house regardless of the risk of her being caught harboring him. He was still considered at large, after all, what with performing so many successful bank robbing jobs. At times like this, it was so easy to forget everything he'd done and who he actually was under the mask, that he might actually be who he used to be deep down. Instead of, he nearly jumped out of his skin when Scamp had leapt at him and began to lick at his face again. "Hey, Cut that out. Didn't you give me enough of those this morning? Jean questioned, knowing he would get an answer from the pup. Apparently not, Inko-san said, amusement and mirth in her voice as she placed the tea set down on the table and sat next to him. Hearing her, Scamp decided to settle between them both to get some love from the both of them. Jean couldn't help smiling down at Scamp smiling and messed with his ears. Hey, are you okay? Inko-san asked, placing a hand on his arm, surprising him with the question. Yeah, I'm fine. Why do you ask? Jean answered. When has my chaotic, but ever been okay? You're quieter today. Normally we'd be talking about your day by this point. Inko-san replied, and Jean realized she was right and rubbed the back of his neck. Right, sorry. Just got caught up thinking. Jean apologized. I don't have to say anything. Words don't define my existence. Oh, what were you thinking about? Inko-san inquired, tilting her head. Jean glanced away from her, just about how lucky I was to run into you. I wouldn't be nearly as happy as I am now if I hadn't. Jean confessed, only slightly surprised when the other voice didn't counter the statement. Inko-san gave him an understanding, albeit sad, smile. I think you're giving me too much credit twice. I doubt you would have made it so far without putting in your own effort to get here. Inko-san told him, patting him on the arm. Jean chuckled. Maybe. Jean replied, deciding not to argue about her downplaying her part in helping him rebuild a life for himself. And instead, he just began talking about what the neighborhood kids had gotten up to. Upon waking up from the knockout given to him by Raijin, Hawks had found himself with a lot to think about. Things that led to him sitting in his apartment that night, surrounded by the files the HPSC had given him once he got back from retraining and were previously left unread. He hadn't touched them before because he didn't want to see anything that would painfully remind him of the recent betrayal and dig the knife in his heart even further. But after Raijin had gone so far as to literally try and knock some sense into him, Hawks couldn't stop himself from looking through them. And the more he read, the more he began to kick himself for not going to see Zuri. Since as much as the people gathering the files had tried to twist Zuri's actions as Deku-Sensei, Hawks only found more and more layers that showed their friendship wasn't some predetermined honey trap to get his claws in him. Because yes, there were files about Zuri meeting with high-level criminals like Morozov and a large number of Vespas. But nearly all of the files showed Zuri helping people or playing with kids. Pausing when he saw a picture of a person Zuri had once described to him, a young boy covered in stripes that was climbing all over Zuri with the boy laughing about it. The file he was holding flagging the child since he had a strong quirk that affected the body and mind. Even before he read it, he knew the kid's name because Zuri had gushed about the boy to him. And that was just the first one he recognized. The longer and longer he read on, the more he recalled these clearly browbeaten people from what the boy had told him of them, and after finding the 50th person, Hawks just had to stop and put his head in his hands to keep from being completely overwhelmed. Because, frankly, at that moment as he sat in his living room with his feathers all bundled in his bed and surrounded by files, he'd been reading them with the dozens of lights from the skyline outside his window. He had to struggle with two very conflicting feelings over his recent revelations. As on one hand, learning that he hadn't fallen into some convoluted honey trap from his target, and that his first friend that fed him and let him stop being Hawks for a few precious moments actually cared about him, and the relief of that nearly bowled him over. But on the other hand, a new looming fear had slowly trickled throughout his body, ice creeping in his veins and chilling him to the bone. Since the only people who would be trying so strong to vilify something like helping young children was someone that clearly wasn't on the right side of the morality spectrum. And that was exactly what the HPSC was doing, which was a horrible thing to realize. And yet Hawks wasn't as shocked by it as he should have been. More of an unpleasant knowledge that he was only now fully understanding what he already knew. Because if he was being honest, this wasn't the first secretly evil organization thing that he'd seen from them. You weren't supposed to buy children from their parents. However, that didn't stop the commission from paying off his mother to take him, and them forcing him to shed his wings and feathers, then burning them year after year. That was probably against more than one child abuse law, no matter how much his handlers told him it would make his wings bigger and stronger. Or having to make his first kill when he was only 10 years old, that was probably also not so legal. But all of that paled after Raijin pointed out the whole Lady Nagant situation to him, unlocking an entirely new fear for him. Hawks had always been afraid of stepping out of line in fear of retraining and aware of he'd been straddling a thin line. However, he hadn't known just how thin that line was or that if he fell off it would have him land in acid and not on the concrete. This new knowledge of how replaceable he was kept him up through the night, the fear making itself right at home in the pit of his stomach. A few of them constantly cycling through his mind repeatedly as he laid in bed trying to force his brain into sleep. Like was the only reason they had burned Lady Nagant's life, because she killed the previous head of the commission. Or would another slip of the tongue be enough for him to be sent away to become Lady Nagant's cellmate? Because he wasn't sure he would be able to keep his mouth shut if someone tried to badmouth Zuri in front of him now. He didn't feel the need to snap at the rude reporters before, because he was still reeling from when he thought Zuri was trying to worm his way into his side, but now that he knew Zuri was only trying to help him, and even searching for ways to keep him from facing the same fate as Lady Nagant, there would be a serious risk of him losing his cool on them. And if that wasn't a scary enough thought now that he knew that he could be sent to Tartarus over it, he was supposed to have his next appearance on Hands Up Radio for a charity live stream tomorrow, and there would undoubtedly be questions about the statement Zuri and UA staff gave recently. Unfortunately, for him, Hawks hadn't found any answers in his mind's late-night rambling, and the next morning came far too soon for him. With a great deal of dread weighing him down, Hawks got ready for another day at the agency and went through the motions of what he needed to do without seeming suspicious. And not for the first time, but the most gratefully probably, Hawks was able to hide everything about the swirling mess of anxiety coursing through him with all of the training they'd given to hide his true feelings, especially towards the sidekicks they'd hired for them, as the fact they were likely relaying information to the commission was now much more frightening than it was before. Frankly, the only silver lining was that he'd be able to leave early to go to the stream, which Zuri would hopefully be listening to, since Zuri had told him that he loved listening to Hands Up and that Mike was one of his favorite heroes later on in their interactions. And he hoped that would be true even now, because as worried as he was about reacting out of character from what the HPSC expected of him, Rajan's warning of Zuri cutting contact with him was something that Hawks was far more afraid of. Because after years of being led around like a puppet on a string, he could hardly stand the thought of losing the only person he had left that was being honest with him and cared about him beyond his role as a hero. Of course, how he'd get the message that he didn't want to stop seeing Zuri across without coming out and actually saying it would be a problem. He couldn't risk the commission, or anyone else for that matter, knowing about their secret connection to each other. Sadly, Hawks wasn't able to come to a solid way before he had to go. Thankfully, he didn't need to worry about any of the sidekicks following him to the stream, and as soon as he was done for the day, Hawks all but leapt off the balcony of his office, racing through the sky directly towards the radio station on the most direct route, even if he had to swoop over a couple of skyscrapers until he landed on the roof of the building next door, making sure to straighten himself out because his flight had affected his appearance. Hawks didn't often feel the need to preen himself, but Zuri liked present Mike, and the man had been rather nice to him last time he helped out, so Hawks decided to spend a minute or two straightening his hair before he went into the station. Satisfied he looked appropriate, Hawks hopped off the building, slowing his fall with a few flaps of his wings, and walked right up to the door, and going inside, his eyes immediately landing upon Mick's assistant Shelly. To be fair to him, though her hair was made of strings of shiny white seashells, and Zuri said most avian quirk people couldn't resist the allure of any shiny or reflective object. "Oh, Hawks, you're right on time. Come on, Mick's about to go on air," Shelly said once she looked up from the paperwork she was holding. Hawks threw her a grin. "Great. Mind showing me to a coat closet first, though?" Hawks asked, and she complied easily enough. Hawks took off his aviator jacket and then looked at his wings, feeling conflicted. Hawks very much wanted to shed all of his feathers and leave them here in the closet, but he wasn't sure he could square that away with his handlers. "All right, do you think you could separate your wings for a couple hours? We're using some special equipment to handle the donations. The person who normally does it had a family emergency, and the only operator we could get on such short notice has a feather allergy," Shelly requested, trying her best to sound kind about it, likely not wanting to offend him. But Hawks had to keep himself from perking up upon hearing that. "Sure, not a problem," Hawks casually said, mentally fist pumping in his head as he disconnected all of his feathers and set them to rest together on a shelf in the closet. allowing a small bit of his pep in his step as he walked with Shelly over to the recording booth and saw Mike in the booth, looking much like he had last time. His hair down from how he constantly put it up and his mic collar thing resting on the desk, so he seemed more relaxed but recognizable all the same. Mike smiled at him and waved him to come on in, which Hawks happily complied with and settled in the chair next to Mike, the man offering him a hand. "Hey, kiddo, great to see you again." Mike greeted with a smile. Hawks grinned right back at him, happy to be here, especially to help with such a good cause. Hawks replied, "You're more than welcome. Now we'll be on the air in 3, 2, 1. Hey, little listeners," Mike said, his radio voice being injected with much more energy. "For those of you just tuning in, welcome, and feel free to throw your hands up with us. Because today we're having a very special program for you. Normally we just talk on Sundays, but the people of St. Apollo's reached out to us for a collab." Mike began to explain. And for those of you little listener who've been around for a while know just how much we'll love those guys and how big of an honor it is to help them with this shout-out. And just like on Sunday, I ain't alone in this, so let's give my lovely co-host a hand, or should I say a wing? Mike questioned, giving him his opening. "That's very kind of you, Mike, but you're being much too kind to me. Who could turn down a chance to help St. Apollo's?" Hawks replied, moving his to a shrug-like position, making Mike laugh. St. Apollo was one of the charities he genuinely adored. It was an international program dedicated to helping children in places left with unstable governments after the Quirk Wars get the help they needed to with their quirks. Right, so for the next 2 hours, little listeners, the number 4 hero Hawks, and I will be answering your questions and collecting donations from those of you out there. Our goal is to raise 500,000 yen, but don't feel bad if you can't send us anything, folks. Mike told them, not everyone has the money to do so, and that is okay, little listeners, but if you can donate even a little bit, we have people standing by at XXX Live that will be happy to take your details and a link on our website up for you to donate money at. Mike informed everyone. And for every 50,000 yen we raise, Hawks and I will sing a song you guys want us to sing, which is what that comment box on the website is for. The songs will be picked at random by my assistant, though remember to keep it PC, folks. Mike further elaborated with a wink at Shelly, who gave a thumbs up back. So, with that said, let's get this show on the road and have our first question. Go ahead, little listener. Mike said, pressing a button, starting off a round of questions much like how things went the first time. Though they raised money much faster than Hawks thought they would, which led to him singing with Mike sooner than he thought they would, and nearly laughing when the next caller questioned him on why his voice was so good. The next question wasn't nearly as innocent, and the good mood that had been built was quickly ripped away from him as the somewhat familiar voice of a woman spoke. Hawks, how do you feel about Midoriya continuing to work at UA? Especially since not a week before he was seen on TV threatening another hero. Do you really think that someone like that should around our children, much less be teaching them? Hawks' brain stalled for a moment, but once the woman's voice and words registered, Hawks' hands nearly broke the chair's armrests. He didn't remember the woman's name, but he sure as hell remembered how she spoke to Zuri during the press conference and how utterly condescending she had been to him. And oh, how his BLD boiled. How dare she question Zuri's capabilities? Zuri was an incredibly intelligent and kind person that risked his life every day to help others, and even went so far as to help him regardless of the risk to his own person, despite knowing that the HPSC would probably kill him if they knew Zuri was aware of their dirty laundry. The sheer gall of her. Hawks, even though he hadn't let his anger show on his face, he needed a moment to breathe before he found the words to answer her. Well, ones that wouldn't give away his real relationship with the boy. I am very happy that UA has Midoriya-san on their staff, and I fully support Midoriya-san's reaction to Death Arms. Hawks coolly answered, causing a shocked gasp from the woman as she began to sputter. Remembering the button to cut the call that Mike had been using the whole time, Hawks hung up on her. To elaborate on my view for just a minute, I think what Midoriya-san did in that situation was 100% justified, Hawks stated, capitalizing on this moment to possibly reach out to Zuri. Death Arms is a hero, yes, but what he was trying to do was crossing many lines. From trying to arrest a scared child, who was under the influence of a mental quirk, to attempting to prevent said child from receiving medical attention afterwards, even when they had been in point-blank range of numerous explosions, is completely unacceptable. Hawks laid out. And Midoriya-san did exactly what people should do in that situation and made him back off and protected both of the victims of that incident from an overly aggressive hero that was throwing his weight around. Hawks told them, crossing his arms. Heroes aren't perfect, and honestly, it is a major relief to me that someone is willing to point out our flaws in teaching the next generation of heroes. Because I know for a fact that people like Midoriya-san keep people who'd abuse the power and status that being a hero grants them from ever becoming a hero. Hawks confessed, a sliver of his emotion escaping him as he said this. And for those of you that can't seem to fathom the idea of Midoriya-san teaching, let me ask you something. Hawks said, leaning forward and continuing on this role since Mike hadn't stopped him. Do you need your quirk to cook? What about cleaning? Or how about writing? Do you need your quirk to walk or move any of your limbs? How about speaking? Do you need it to do anything in your day-to-day life? Hawks questioned, waiting a few seconds before he spoke again. No. Then why does the fact he doesn't have a quirk mean anything to you people? Hawks asked, then huffed, jutting his chin upwards in his irritation. I mean, it's not like people are supposed to use their quirks in public spaces like schools outside of quirk classes. Because in case most of you have forgotten, it is quite illegal to use your quirk outside of private properties unless you have a legal permit to do so. Hawks spitefully added, even with his voice still somehow remaining even. So, I frankly can't see a difference between Midoriya-san and any other teacher out there that has a quirk. Hawks stated, running out of steam, only to jolt when there was a loud pop sound and a round of applause. Mike cleared his throat. Thank you, little listeners. It seems we've reached our donation goal. Mike told them, and Hawks blinked owlishly and gaped at the bar, which was only halfway past the first tier and was now nearly double that. Asterisk Hawks thought in complete disbelief and wondering who in the world would donate so much. Well, it seems we'll have to pause on the question, folks, because we have a few songs to sing. Mike said, dodging, addressing the rant Hawks just gave to pull up the song they were supposed to sing. By the end of the 2 hours, Hawks found himself rather drained, and he slumped in the chair. Hey kiddo, you did great, here, take some, Mike said after he returned from the break room with another pair of water bottles, and Hawks gratefully took one, guzzling the first half of it, then wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Thanks, and I'm sorry about how charged the other half of the stream got after my rant. Hawks apologized, rubbing the back of his neck. More than one person had tried to argue with him over what he said about Zuri and how his quirklessness was a reason to fire him, or that Zuri had no right to argue with a hero. Mike huffed, bemused, and dismissively waved his hand that, "Now don't sweat it. Honestly, it was nice to hear someone else go to bat for him." Mike replied before leaning forward on his elbows. "Don't tell anyone I said this, but you're Midoriya's second favorite hero. So I think what you said really means a lot to him. I can't imagine how amazing it would be to have one of my heroes say they supported me personally in such a public way, and even went on to defend me," Mike said, and Hawks' heart leapt hearing that. "I'm in his top 3. Hawks couldn't help asking, butterflies fluttering in his abdomen since he knew how critical Zuri was of heroes, and being elated by the news, even as Mike laughed. "Yeah, and that's way more of an honor than you would know," Mike answered, and Hawks didn't correct him, instead hoping that he was still in Zuri's top 3 despite how cold he had been to the boy. Suddenly, Mick's eyes went wide, and for a brief second, Hawks feared he said that out loud until Mike dug around in his pocket. "All right, here, I managed to corral Eraser into signing this and have been meaning to get this to you, but my schedule's been packed lately," Mike told him, and offered him a piece of folding paper. Hawks' eyes shot open, and he immediately unfolded it to examine the paper. It was a blurry photo of Eraserhead from the day he caught a ride on him to the mall, and in the corner was a scratchy signature of Eraserhead. "This is fantastic, Mike. Zuri will love it," Hawks told the man, beaming at him. Zuri would lose his mind if he gave it to him, and if Hawks had his wings, they would be fluttering from how happy he was. But he wouldn't be able to give it to Zuri until Tuesday, and that was way too long to go without seeing Zuri in person and knowing things were fixed between them. But how could he make up a way to see him without being suspicious? It wasn't like he could just go strolling up to you. Hey, this might be short notice, but do you need someone to help you commentate on the sports festival?" Hawks asked, sitting on the edge of his seat. "Sonny," Mirio called. Sonny, from where he had been covered in a mountain of blankets, buried his face deeper into his bed. "Sunny, please," he called again. Sunny pointedly didn't answer, and instead pressed the pillow covering his head down to drown him out, and stubbornly refused to acknowledge Mirio. Mirio sighed and sat on Sunny's bed next to him. "You know I can just use my quirk to talk to you face to face, right?" Mirio asked. He didn't get a reply. Mirio sighed and fell back and laying on top of his best friend, whom spent the last couple of hours trying and failing to ignore the rest of the world and forget what had happened today. Normally, he'd be more concerned about Sunny's severe reaction, but Miyake had already filled him in on what happened and why he had to bring an unconscious Sunny home, as well as why Oswald had his face buried in a tree. And Sunny was taking this much better than he thought he would. "Okay, so Oz kissed you on the forehead and asked if you'd be interested in going on a date with him," Mirio said, and Sunny whimpered, perhaps reliving the whole thing in his head. "Do you not want to go out with him?" Mirio asked, making sure to stay really quiet so that he could hear Sunny's answer. "And no," Sunny mumbled after a few minutes. "No, you don't want to go on a date, or no, you want to go on a date with Oz?" Mirio inquired, wanting to be extra sure. Sunny's next noise Mirio wasn't sure was entirely human, but clearly got across Sunny's difficulty to form words. Then he muttered something Mirio couldn't hear well through the blankets. "Could you repeat that, Sunny?" Mirio requested. "I w want to." Sunny squeaked back, his voice cracking. "That's great then. You two both like each other and want to go out. That's awesome for you two." Mirio said, happy for his friends. He teased Sunny about the guys around them, but he was genuinely excited for them, and he didn't even feel any prickles of jealousy or envy like for training, which made him even happier for his friend. "It's not," Sunny whimpered, and Mirio huffed in bemused confusion. "Why not?" Mirio questioned, ready to talk Sunny out of whatever molehill Sunny's anxiety was making into a mountain. Sunny fell silent for a long time, and Mirio was even considering using his quirk to check on him when Sunny finally spoke. "I'm scared I don't like Oswald," Sunny muttered, throwing a wrench into Mirio's mental process, and his brain stalled. What do you mean? You want to go on a date with him, but don't know if you like him?" Mirio questioned, moving to lay beside his friend instead of on top of him. Sunny again was silent for a while, but he could see Sunny's hands grip the pillow tightly. I'm scared that the only reason I like him is because of the villain attack on them all. There's this thing called Nightingale Syndrome, where you develop feelings for the person taking care of you or saved your life, and I only noticed him that way after them all. Sunny explained tentatively. "And then if I go out him only to fall out of love with him, it would be horrible to lead him on like that when I know my feelings might not be real," Sunny added, and Mirio knew Sunny had started to tear up under all his covers. "Oh, Sunny," Mirio said under his breath as he placed his hand on Sunny's back over the covers. Sadness all but crushed his earlier joy as his heart went out to his friend. While he'd become accustomed to helping talk Sunny down from the ledges his anxiety often pushed him to, in this case, he couldn't even tell Sunny that this particular fear was just him working himself up into a stupor, because he knew was talking about transference. It came up often in hero circles. Mirio could think of 5 different stories off the top of his head where a hero married someone that they rescued only to have horrid divorces months later. The villain attack at the mall would be a prime example of a place where transference could occur, and if he encouraged Sunny to just go ahead and do it anyways when he did only have these feelings because of transference, then Sunny would probably end up trapped in that relationship. Sunny began to cry mostly quietly, and Mirio rushed to rub Sunny's back. Hey, Sunny, this isn't that bad. We can work through this," Mirio assured, mind rushing to find a solution. "Oz is an understanding guy. If we tell him what's up, he won't hold it against you and wait for you to sort your feelings out," Mirio told Sunny. "How could I wait this out? We see each other every day at school," Sunny countered, sounding utterly miserable. "We can talk to Oz. Stay clear of him for a while. Everyone would understand, Sunny. And if you don't want to date him afterwards, no one would blame you. People just don't want to date each other, and we could all stay friends, you know," Mirio argued, trying to keep him from falling into a deeper depression spiral. "But how am I supposed to hang out with everyone if I don't? I'd never be able to be in the same room as him again without thinking about him kissing my head, or that he wanted to date me, and that I broke his heart and dash." Sunny's argument dissolved as he presumably began crying again. Mirio began floundering as he tried to calm him down. having never had to fix something like this before. Sunny, our friend group, isn't so shallow that we'd all break up the second one of us has a fight, and you're overthinking all of this. There's only like a 50% chance that whether you like him or not, you don't have to worry about that right now. Mirio told Sunny, trying to calm him down. It took a few hours, but Mirio did manage to keep Sunny from having a full breakdown. Though he was still buried in a mountain of blankets, and Mirio chose to step outside for a breath of fresh air, going so far as to walk to the bottom floor and leaned against the side wall as he ran his hand through his hair. This had been more complex than he first thought. And as much as Mirio tried to assure Sunny, he couldn't be absolutely sure that their new friends wouldn't be affected by things if Sunny and Oz didn't end up together. Oz, as antagonistic he was, and for all of the jabs he made, Mirio didn't think that he'd be mean about it or even make a big deal out of it if Sunny said he didn't want to go out with him. Maybe distance himself for a while and not be as physical with Sunny. Then there would be Sunny's reaction, because Sunny was probably right about him being uncomfortable with us being around after this if they didn't end up together, which would cause strain between everyone since the two were in the same class with most of their friends together. Mirio blinked when his phone started ringing, and he checked the number, and his stomach flipped when he saw Oz's contact on his phone, gulping before he answered it with a slightly shaky, "Hey Oz, didn't I misread things at bad SDRPR?" Oz asked, sounding dejected. "What? No. Just Sunny doesn't really know how he feels about you." Mirio quickly corrected, waving his other hand as if to dissuade the notion. "Like I never knew I liked guys sort of thing. Or I never saw you that way thing." Oz questioned, a bit less dejected. Neither. He's worried he only wants to go out with you because of the mall attack. Transference, you know." Mirio answered, hoping that Oz would understand what he meant. "Oh, that sucks. Jiki doing okay?" Oz inquired after a few moments, and Mirio sighed. "He's doing as good as he can considering," Mirio confessed, rubbing the back of his neck, and he heard Oz sigh on the other end. I'm sorry, SDRPR. I didn't mean for him to ducktail like this. Just didn't want Jiki and I to end up dancing around each other like a pair of idiots." Oz apologized. "I know you didn't," Mirio assured, clearly hearing how much the Pinkette was kicking himself for this over the phone. "I didn't know about the transference thing before Sunny told me a few hours ago. I'm sure we can work everything out, though," Mirio added, getting a grunt from Oz in return. "Right, I guess this ain't that crappy, so you want me to avoid Jiki for a while. I could fake being sick too if that helps," Oz offered, greatly surprising Mirio and making him choke on the air. "What? No. You don't have to go that far, especially not with the festival so close," Mirio said back, and Oz sighed again. "But the festival's going to be a problem, isn't it? We'll probably have to face each other during the one-on-ones or work with each other during the second round," Oz pointed out, and Mirio's shoulders slumped as he realized that Oz was right. "Yeah, that's true," Mirio said, and he covered his mouth. Oz chuckled on the other end. "You know that isn't a proper swear, right, SDRPR?" Oz said, and Moreau couldn't help cracking a smile himself. "So, about avoiding Sunny, I think that should be the plan going forward until Sunny figures out what he wants. He'll probably figure it out by September, since August will be our month-long break," Mirio told his friend. "Cool. Yeah, we can do that. And if things don't work out, we could just ask to SWCH classes, so Jiki doesn't have to deal with seeing me," Oz replied, again shocking Mirio. "Oz, I don't think that'll dash," Mirio tried to protest, but Oz interrupted. "We both know Jiki would die of embarrassment if he didn't want to date me after this, and it would be easier on everybody if I moved instead of Jiki. I mean, could you imagine Jiki lasting that long in 2B?" Oz questioned. Regrettably, Mirio found himself agreeing with Oz's points. His classmates were much nicer to him now, but he wouldn't think about leaving them alone with Sunny for any PRD of time. "Canny body or not, I have some thick skin, SDRPR, so those idiots won't faze me with their kindergarten grade insults. Besides, I'm a teacher's kid now, so I probably won't get in that much trouble if I kick their butts for talking CRP," Oz said, and Mirio laughed a bit awkwardly. Mainly because he was half certain that Oz wasn't joking about beating them up. He'd seen Oz glare at people over saying things about them in the cafeteria before, and the Pinkette would always wrap his hair around Sunny during those times. "Somehow I don't think that Sensei, Sano-sensei, would let you get away with that," Mirio said back with a sweat drop. Probably not want me to talk to the others about what's going on. Wouldn't want Hato to try and lock me and Jiki in a closet to sort ourselves out. Oz inquired. Oof. Nijire-chan would do something like that, but no, I can handle that. Thanks for being so understanding about this, Oz. Mirio told him, slightly relieved. It's no problem, STRPR. My feelings aren't that strong yet, and I wanted to see how Jiki felt about going out before they got out of control. I ain't going to be, but hurt over rejection like the little hell spawn. Oz replied, trying to play it off. Mirio's eyes fell to the ground, still. Thanks for not pushing on this and trying to keep Sunny's feelings in mind. Mirio insisted, almost imagining the eye roll from Oz. Like I'd be in, but to Jiki over the SHD, I started STRPR. I defend myself more, but I gotta call my mom and aunt. Oz said, and Mirio gave him a quick goodbye before Oz hung up. Moreau took a deep breath, then began to open up his individual chats with his friends to privately explain what was going to be happening the next couple of weeks. He really hoped that things wouldn't go that badly, regardless of what Sunny's real feelings were or what happened after Sunny figured them out. Yoritoki groaned as he rubbed his temples. He'd been having more and more problems remembering things lately, and as the paper in front of him told him, it had been affecting his grades. Geez, Kai, did you turn your test last minute? Machida, a girl from the support course, asked as she sat next to him once again. Yoritoki sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. No, just the family mental problems acting up again. I don't know how Aunt Shelley gets anything done at the station. Yoritoki exclaimed. Machida nodded her head. Ever since she first sat with him, Yoritoki had told his buddy about the family curse in hopes it would make the girl leave him alone. However, the girl seemed to be completely unfazed by his constant forgetfulness, much to his chagrin. Machida hummed, setting her head on her fist. And you've been taking the new meds when you were supposed to? She asked, and he rolled his eyes. Yes, not like they ever do anything to fix the problem. Can't fix a curse with pills, you know. Yoritoki grumbled, moving on to actually eat his lunch. Hey, Kai, Machida said, and he hummed back. Do you ever think that the problem might be because your quirk? Machida asked, and he threw her a look and grabbed a string of his hair. My quirk is to grow strings of seashells instead of hair. Other than it coming out of my head, I don't see how that could affect my memory. Yoritoki told her, rolling his eyes. I don't know how it would either, but you said the only ones who have problems are the ones with seashell hair like you, so it might. Machida countered, and he groaned. Even if it was, how would I go about finding that out? Just go out and find a quirk counselor and say, hey, I think these seashells I'm growing are sucking my memories out. Any way you can prove it. Yoritoki said with a scoff. Machida flinched back at his tone, but persisted. Well, no, but you can ask one of the quirk teachers about it. Machida pointed out, as if Wanabo-sensei is too busy talking with the other kids to have any time for this, and I think one of my counselors would have said something about it by now. Yoritoki replied before taking a bite of his food. Then we could just ask Deku-Sensei. Machida countered, and Yoritoki couldn't help scoffing. In case you've forgotten, Machida, I'm in Gen Ed, and you'd be strong-pressed getting any of those heroics guys to talk with any of us lowly EDS. Yoritoki blew off. That bullet-jacker woman maybe, but Deku-Sensei isn't like that. He'd definitely help you. Machida argued. You may be, Yoritoki said, pointing his chopsticks to where her nose would have been. Because you're in support, of course he's going to be nice to you. Yoritoki added seconds later. Besides, ain't he the guy everyone's been talking about on the news? The guy who expelled 3 dudes on the first day. And you want me to go to him about my memory problems? Yoritoki questioned, giving her a look that hopefully conveyed how ridiculous he thought she was being for suggesting something like that. Machida's cheeks puffed up from indignation. Deku-sensei wasn't just helping me to be nice. He covered half of my Jima-sensei's classes the other day, and even showed us how to patch up the entrance exam robots after school closed until my Jima-sensei got back. Machida told him. He's super smart with quirks and taught us a lot of common design problems for certain quirks. If your quirk is what's causing you problems, he'll know, and even tell us how to fix it. She huffily told him before standing up. You'll see, once school gets out, I'll take you up to the teacher's offices, and we'll go ask him together. Machida fired off and stomped away before he could even get the chance to deny it. Yoritoki sked and stabbed one of the shrimp on his plate, like he'd actually go along with her cockamamie plan. And if she got upset with him ditching her, he'd just tell her he forgot about what they talked about. You know I could sue you for kidnapping for this, right? Yoritoki spat as Machida, through use of one of the net guns she complained about them working on this week, dragged him to the faculty room. Machida gave a soft hum. I'm sure that if you remember what happens tomorrow, you'll be thanking me for this. Machida responded, not at all bothered by his threat. Demon basement gremlin. Yoritoki thought in his mind, cursing himself for not cutting the crazy girl from support out of his life as his senpais had warned him to do. He could hear Machida knocking on a door, and one opening seconds later, and guessed they were wherever Machida wanted to bring him. Hey, kiddo, do you any wo there, missy? You two looking for my Jima-san to help get your friend over there out? A voice asked, and given the accent, Yoritoki assumed it had to be Snipe from the hero course. He couldn't exactly see much, since the net wasn't see-through. Hello, Snipe-sensei. No, we're actually here to see Deku-Sensei. Is he still in? Machida replied calmly. There was a moment of silence, and Yoritoki hoped that Snipe would have half a brain and get someone to help him out of the situation. Yeah, I think he's still here. Come on in, wouldn't want your friend to block up the hallway. Snipe answered, and Yoritoki cursed the man under his breath, while Machida gave him a cheerfully thank you, then started dragging him again. It seemed that the man had no more sense than the feral gremlin that decided to kidnap him. Deku-sensei, Machida called a second later. Oh, hello, Mock Machida-san, what are you doing? Someone else, much younger, asked, and Yoritoki figured that the girl had successfully brought him right to the young boy as she promised. Yoritoki was startled when he felt someone's arms around his waist suddenly pick him up and plop him, still in the net, mind you, on a chair. Or maybe a couch if they were in the teacher's lounge, but it didn't feel big, so he was putting his money on the ladder. Sorry about this, Deku-sensei, but my friend Kai has a problem, and we wanted to know if it might be quirk-related, but Kai's stubborn, so I had to get creative about getting him to come along. Machida explained to Deku. If by creative, you mean jump me on the way out of class with your homework from last week, then you sure got creative, Machida. Yoritoki spat, crossing his arms. He heard the boy sigh. Machida-san, Deku said scoldingly. I'm sorry, Deku-sensei, but I promise this is important, okay? Please just listen to what's going on with Kai, and if you still think I'm overreacting, I'll take however many days of detention you want to give me for this. No complaints? Machida pleaded. I'm giving you a week of detention either way for this, Machida-san. Now please let Kai-san out so that we can talk about this face-to-face. Deku requested, sounding rather exasperated by the situation. As much as it irked him, Yoritoki was glad someone else was able to see what Machida was doing as much of an annoyance as he did. Though it sucked that it was the kid a year younger than him, was the only one that seemed to see that. Thankfully, though, Yoritoki found that the net had been pulled down so he could once again see. Blinking, he saw he was indeed in the teacher's offices and not the lounge. Less fortunately, he saw the only two people around were Deku and Machida, and he groaned with a facepalm. Apologizes, Kai-san. I hope Machida-san didn't keep you from anything that important. Deku said, but Yoritoki could hardly blame the guy for what the girl had done. You're not the one who should be apologizing. Yoritoki grumbled, crossing his arms again. However, he noticed the boy's eyes on his hands, more than likely on his nail polish, and chose to hold one of his hands up. Want to know the name of my stylist? Yoritoki asked dryly. Deku's eyes went from his hand to his hair and back a few times before he spoke. Are you having problems with your memory, Kai-san? Deku asked, making Yoritoki jolt and retract his hand at once. Well, have you been talking with my teacher or something? Yoritoki questioned. Or muscle cramps? Numbness in your hands, perhaps? Deku inquired, making his heart plummet even further than from where it was in his stomach. How did you? I didn't dash, Yoritoki sputtered, but the boy merely shook his head and grumbled something under his breath, and the boy pinched the bridge of his nose. You have a calcium deficiency, Kai-san. It's not uncommon for those with quirks like yours that consume massive amounts of calcium, Deku said, reaching into his bag and digging around for something. Then he pulled out a bottle of seeds. These are chia, poppy, and celery seeds. They are full of calcium, and you should be eating at least 16 ounces of these a day, or a calcium-rich substitute to make up for what your quirk takes from you. Deku told him as he placed the bottle of seeds in his hand. Wait, what are you talking about? Yoritoki questioned, waving his hands. Deku took a deep breath. Despite popular belief, Deku said, as if the words pained him to say so politely, all quirks, regardless of type, have dietary needs. And with your quirk growing seashells, you need to consume much more calcium than the average person since that is what they're made of, Deku explained. How someone hasn't told you this before now, or noticed that you were suffering from a calcium deficiency before now, I don't know, but thankfully we have found the problem before it could cause irreparable damage to you and put you on a diet to correct the damage that we can, Deku told him. Likely seeing his incredulous look on his face, Deku's shoulders slumped. Look, if you don't believe me, you can have a test done with a doctor to officially confirm it for you, or you can eat all of this bottle and see how you feel the next morning, Deku offered as he got his things together. If you need a prescription for calcium pills, do tell me as I can write one for quirk-related medical needs. And I am certain that Machida-san can find me for you again, Deku added before he moved to the door, only to stop and turn to the girl without dragging you along in a net. Deku said, and Machida sheepishly nodded her tail, tucked behind her. AI stood by the gates the next day, tapping her foot as she waited for Kai to arrive. She was curious about whether or not he'd taken Deku-Sensei's advice or not. She didn't think that a doctor's appointment could be quickly booked so last minute, but the boy could have eaten some of the seeds. She knew Deku-Sensei would at least have a theory about what was going on with her friend, and she was glad she dragged him down to see the young teacher. Even if she had to spend a week of lunchtime detentions with Majima-sensei, it would be worth it if Kai didn't have to worry about one day losing his mind. I couldn't remember the last time she had a friend she could eat lunch with. She was always too big and had too many teeth for anyone else to let her eat anywhere other than the corner or in the classroom. The raw fish she ate probably didn't help the matter. Sushi was one thing, but biting into a whole fish, scales and all had been a severe turn-off for most, even the other mutant kids in her class groups before now. Her classmates were nice and all, but she wouldn't really call any of them her friends. Kai, on the other hand, let her sit with him and even talked with her about more personal issues like his family's mental health. She couldn't think of another person who had done that, and it would only be right to do something to help him, right? AI's tail started wagging when she finally spotted the pearl-like strings of Kai's hair and rushed over to him. Kai, she called, but he didn't turn to face her. In fact, he seemed to have one of those rumored 1,000-mile stares. Kai, she repeated, waving her hand in front of his face, somewhat concerned. I had everything in my bag this morning. Kai muttered. That's nice. AI said. Kai would grumble at lunch about forgetting something at home once in a while. I haven't remembered to pack everything in my bag since I was 10, Machida. Kai told her his shoulders started trembling while hers slumped. Kai, she said, only to jump when he suddenly hugged her, and she placed her arms around him. You were right, Kai told her, and as much as she wanted to preen under this fact, comforting Kai would take priority, the boy having been more disheveled by following Deku-Sensei's advice than she expected. Kikin hummed as they watched on from their desk, tapping the pen in their hand as they watched one of their coworkers head over to the door. Someone had knocked on it, and they were willing to bet that it would be one of the students. Something that seemed to be growing in volume since Midoriya covered for Majima, which had led the support course first years to come into the office looking for the boy, and even a few EDS coming up to see the boy the past couple of days. Oh, hey Sai-chan. What you need, little listener? Mike asked, happily greeting one of the business course students, likely one of his own. Hello, Mike-sensei. Is Midoriya-san here? I've got a question for him. The young girl replied, and Kikin huffed in their head. And now Midoriya was starting to grab up kids from the business course. Kikin placed their head in their hand as they considered the last couple weeks since Midoriya had joined the staff. His appearance was one that brought a lot of turmoil. No one had been told of Midoriya's hire until the day before, and they certainly weren't informed of who was to be hired. Just an email from Nizu about gathering all the first-year teachers and department heads to meet the new addition to the roster. Though currently speaking, they hadn't had the pleasure of interacting with Midoriya beyond that first staff meeting, which seemed to be a real shame since a good chunk of the other first-year teachers had one story to tell about the boy and his hijinks at this point. Namuri had taken to bragging about the boy's art, which seemed to be the only way she could actually fluster the boy. Snipe was bringing in the good coffee, attempting to bribe Bullet Jacker into letting Midoriya help him with the next shooting exercise, apparently having no fear of once again being tossed on his, but by the young boy, or getting another shot to the throat. Yamato was concerned about the boy, but fumbling in how to go about his concerns, which has only gotten worse since Sunday. Bullet Jacker likely has a few, since she spent most of the day with Midoriya. Not that she talked about him, without it being a backhanded comment towards her former students that now made up most of the staff for the hero course. or Haruki since the two seemed to share lunch PRD more often than not. Majima had also been singing the boys' praises since Midoriya somehow knew how to calm his class of gremlin children. And they had to concede to that point, because the few of Class 1G who'd come by were much tamer in comparison to some of Majima's usual problem children. And of course, everyone and their mother probably knew Aizawa had the biggest bone to pick with the boy. The man had come in looking much worse for wear since once a week, every week, since the boy's students would jump him to keep him from dragging Midoriya in. Something that wasn't alleviated by the fact Midoriya was a fan of Aizawa, though they certainly got a kick out of how Aizawa's face scrunched up when his eyes lingered on either replicated goggles or scarf. Kikken smirked at that last thought. Only a true undergrounder would be upset over the fact they had fans out there, and Aizawa was as underground as a hero could get bar his job here at UA. A soft call of their name brought them out of their thoughts, and they looked up to see Midoriya stood in front of their desk and gave a soft hum. "Yes, Deku-san," they asked. "Sai-san here." Midoriya began motioning to the girl beside him. "Needs a piece of support gear to help her with her quirk. I'll write up her paperwork, but I think one of the support course students would be able to make it for her, since it's a very simple one." Midoriya explained politely. "And you want me to ask one of my kids to WHP it up for you?" Kikken guessed. "They'll get extra credit and paid for the commission." Midoriya promised, already getting his wallet out. "I can write a check now." Midoriya offered as well, pulling out a check. "I'm sure they will be thrilled, money or no. Though the school does insist on a 5,000 yen fee for any student commissions. Might be double since the festival is around the corner." Kikken answered. Midoriya nodded, writing out the check and handing it over along with a couple of papers, likely with what the girl needed built. "Nice doing business with you, Deku-san," Kikken said, tucking the two papers away with plans to approach one of the students tomorrow once the children had returned. The deal done, Midoriya and the young girl both left, Midoriya to get to his other work, and the girl probably leaving to go home. Well, they got their interaction, though they would have liked something less mundane, but they would likely get their chance later. They would have to speak to Midoriya once the support gear was done naturally. Kikken grumbled as they glared at another pile of paperwork for the festival's firewalls. As the main programmer, since Bullet Jacker announced her planned retirement, Kikken had found their desk coated with the technical problems the woman used to deal with. And frankly, they felt so agitated as of late, not to mention the regular stress of the festival. So they were long overdue for a prank, but one it had to be that wouldn't be that extreme, since there would be a good chance Aizawa and Majima would legitimately kill them for it. It would only be for a couple minutes, but Kikken would greatly prefer to avoid any semi-deaths in the near future. They would have to target someone from one of the other departments then. Maybe he should go for one of the students then. If so, it would have to be very small time then. Midoriya likely wouldn't take very kindly if they did something bigger, not that they'd ever do anything like what happened with Tagata. But perhaps they could do something on a bigger scale. The students would do well to have a bit of a laugh, or at least loosen up a little before the big day. But how to go about that in a way that all the classes would enjoy it? They weren't an alumnus, so they wouldn't be able to fully know what any of the students would be feeling currently from past experiences like any of their coworkers could, and they hadn't spent much time with students out of the support course. And unfortunately, Kikken was rather certain none of their coworkers had much experience with the courses outside of their own chosen professions. Yogi didn't count since he was almost 4 generations separated from the current one. He was in his 80s now. Feeling more than hearing an explosion, Kikken sighed and stood from their desk, heading out of their private office on the support floor and towards the studios. One of the first years had to be experimenting again. The third and second years normally tempered out the explosions by now. They were certain that the support course wasn't nearly so volatile at their own alma mater, but they had begrudgingly become used to the liveliness of you. A support course. Didn't mean they liked working with the gearheads, though. They would take the programmers in 1F any day, or the 1 or 2 analysts that ended up in the support course here. They weren't surprised that the noise came from 1G's studio and entered the room, even less surprised by the black soot covering things, or the 2 students already being scolded by Majima. The rainbow tie-dye on everyone in the room did throw them for a loop, though. "Do I want to ask?" Kikken questioned, which made Majima sigh deeply. "No," Majima said, sounding like the tips Midoriya had given him hadn't been working as well as he'd like. "Thank you for your concern, Paradrome, but I have this under control." Majima told them before turning back to the students and his scolding of them. Kikken shook their head and left the studio. There was certain part of the reason Majima had shooed them away was because he was worried they would use whatever tie-dye bomb the students discovered against the staff later. Which was fair enough. They had done so before now a couple of times, but frankly, they had already developed their own brand of paint bombs, so they wouldn't need to look through the students accidentally made one. And as fun as a paint bomb would be, that would just be cruel at the moment. Though they had gotten the basis for an idea that a majority would at least not be completely freaked out by. However, they would need to get someone to help them with it before the festival came. And with a smirk building on their face, since they knew just the person to ask to help them with this. Shoyuta, walking up to the school building, frowned as soon as he got to the doors. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something that made Shoyuta hesitate and want to scowl at the thought of entering. Shoyuta took a deep breath, somehow getting the feeling that today was going to be unreasonably long for him. Then opened up the door and immediately knew why he got this feeling and wanted to strangle one of his coworkers. Because somehow, someway, the halls of UA were decked out with a bunch of decorations that absolutely weren't here yesterday when he left. As sleep-deprived as he was, Shoyuta would like to think that he'd noticed the multiple banners showing support for the 4 courses in the upcoming festival, or the numerous posters showing off a couple of the students from each course like they were running for student council president or something. And he definitely would have remembered the student plushies piled up in barrels all over the halls. How did Chimoka do all of this in less than 24 hours? Picking up one of the dolls, chibi form or not, they were very detailed, and it was easy for Shoyuta to recognize the doll as the blue rose girl from Bullet Jacker's class, shiny legs and all. Looking up and down the hall, Shuta's confusion only grew since there had to be at least 400 dolls just in this hallway, and peeking around the corner shows there to be way more barrels throughout the school. Asterisk, what the hell? Asterisk, Shoyuta thought, because there had to be hundreds of thousands of dolls made overnight with who knows whose money, time, and resources. Checking out for the day, he put the doll down in a random barrel and just left for the break room and was unsurprised when Midoriya was already there scribbling away at his desk muttering. The only thing of major notice was the twin plushy groups of Miyake and his friends taking up a good chunk of the boy's desk space. Shoyuta raised an eye at this, but he wasn't as invested in figuring out the boy's craziness this early in the day and chose to move over to the coffee machine to get a cup in before the rest of the staff got here. Namuri and Hizashi would be absolutely unbearable once they get in and see the student plushies. Some of the others would be too, but his friends would be the most obnoxious about it. And in a self-fulfilling prophecy, the windows rattle in their hinges as a squealing noise that was all too familiar to Shoyuta and making him grimace. Shoyuta sighed, face palming, and began counting down in his head. Asterisk 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Asterisk, Shoyuta thought. Then on cue the door slammed open, and Shoyuta turned on his quirk to glare at Hizashi, who stood in the doorway teary-eyed and his arms bursting at the seams with plushies, most likely those of his students. "Shall look at them?" Hizashi said, voice squeaking from Shoyuta locking up his vocal cords. Shoyuta was so going to spike Chimoka's coffee with garlic for this. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Villain Deku Became a Teacher at UA. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Bloomerbill for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on fanfiction.net for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.